We're going to do another basic concepts episode after we've talked about compression last time. We're talking about gates this time, about noise gates. What that actually is, why would you use it, how it works, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
This is the Self-Recording Band Podcast, the show where we help you make exciting records on your own, wherever you are, DIY style. Let's go. Hello and welcome to the Self-Recording Band Podcast. I am your host, Benedictine, and I'm here with my friend and co-host, Malcolm Owen Flood. How are you, Malcolm?
Hello. I'm great, man. Like I was telling you before, I got new gear over the weekend, and that's always exciting.
That's always exciting, yeah. Tell us about it. What did you get?
I got the UA Universal Audio Apollo X8P, which is their brand new version of the Apollo interfaces, which are really popular. Most people have probably heard of those. But this is, it's a pretty cool overhaul of the studio, actually, because it's the hub, right? So it's new converters, both on the way in and out. I got 8 more channels of preamps. I got now an extra 6 cores of their DSP. So, and then, way more outputs as well for running other stuff and more headphone lines. And it's pretty great. I'm excited about it. And I got it in advance of going to track a band this week, which I'm excited about. They're a band called Vogue Villains on the island here. I know their listeners, so they'll love that shout out. I needed more channels, so I grabbed this. We're going to go do it. And we are doing it in such a self-recording band way. I mean, other than me being there, I guess that's one big mark for it not being a self-recording band.
Yeah.
But we are we're doing it in their jam space. They've been treating it all weekend for me and getting it kind of ready. We're drilling a hole in a wall, so I have a control room. We're doing a whole bunch of cool stuff. Like we're doing cymbal overdubs, just because we don't have that many channels or that much gear to use for this. So we're doing cymbal overdubs. We're doing guitar DI first priority kind of tracking. But there's going to be, we'll be using either like amp sims like Neural or my Kemper, or we'll have amps, but it's like the DI is priority with our setup kind of thing. And they're doing their vocals, so that is all going to be self-done by them. We're really applying what we preach here, so I'm excited to show you the result.
Oh, that's exciting. Did I get that right, that you got the new thing in addition to what you already have? Because you said 8 more inputs?
Yes, but I had the twin already.
Okay, and you're keeping that?
Yeah. So it just daisy chains right in. So I keep those 2 channels. So now I've got like 10 there. We are adding another 8 channels in.
Okay,
as well.
That's what I was asking, because you would then, but you still don't have enough channels for a full drum kit, like
we
up there.
Technically we do. The 8 at ones aren't the best.
Okay.
So I don't really want to rely on them. And It's the drum sound we're going for. Like all of the albums we referenced were recorded that way. So it was like, well, then let's do it that way. That's obvious.
Yeah, like talking about intentional decisions. That's what we always preach here. Like you could do it, but you decided not to. You decided to limit yourself for reasons, for quality reasons, and for aesthetic reasons. So
we wanted.
That's a very valuable thing right there for our listeners to learn. I think you don't have to use all the gear you have if you get better results using just what's actually really good about it, and being intentional about it.
Exactly.
Cool. Exciting.
Yeah. I got more new gear as well, though.
Oh, tell us.
I also got the Little Labs STD, the most unfortunately named piece of gear on the planet. But I'm excited for that. For those that don't know, it's like, I don't even know how to describe it. Essentially, it's a guitar signal cable preserver thing. Just gets your guitar signal to the amp in a better way. So I'm excited for that.
Awesome. Yeah, STD. I don't know who if they didn't think about that name, or I don't know what happened, but
well, it's the Mark II, so they had a chance to change it and they left it. So it's like it's got to be intentional at this point.
Yeah. So, and do you like it so far? Do you enjoy it?
It hasn't shown up yet, but I have used them. One of the studios I use all the time here has one, and I swear by it.
Awesome. Yeah. New gear is always exciting, although it's not the most important thing, but it's still exciting if we get new gear. So
gets you pumped up.
Absolutely. That brings me, like, your story with the what's the band called? Vogue Villains, right?
Yep.
Yeah. I saw it in your posts, I think, and I think they follow the Self-Recording Band as well.
They do.
Yeah. Social. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. What's interesting about your story is that you said that they are going to record vocals themselves, and that brings up a question that I got asked in our Academy community, actually. So this is something that happened inside the Academy. We've launched it a while ago, like 2 weeks ago, I think, when this episode airs. But there's a conversation going in the community there, and I'm curious because do they do all the vocals themselves, like leads and backing and harmonies and all that?
Yes.
Okay, because one of the students asked, and I'm going to answer this in a private coaching call then there, but I think this is valuable for our audience here as well. I got the question of, should you, or do you ever do backing vocals with a whole group of people, like harmonies or backing vocals in general? Do you ever have like 3 people at once singing to the mic, or do you one at a time? What do you do there, and how is this band gonna do it? Like, it's an interesting question, because he was thinking about if you have a group of 3 and they are a little further away from the mic, it would maybe increase the depth or the sense of distance, and if that was a good idea or not. What do you think?
Right. I generally shy away from it, but I have done it for sure. It's definitely a sound. I like to use like a stereo pair when I do that, actually. I find it weird having 3 voices like coming from the exact same spot. It just kind of seems off-putting to me. So I usually would suggest like an XY or Bloom line kind of thing, where it's just slightly stereo. To me, that makes a world of difference in that situation. But I prefer to do vocals one by one for sure. Just way easier to place them where I want in that situation.
Okay,
I guess it is a different sound though. What do you think?
To me, it depends on if we're talking about whether we're talking about backing vocals and harmonies, or if we're talking about gang vocals, choirs, stuff like that. If it's like really gang vocal stuff, then I do groups of people, sometimes even like 5 at a time, and then do like, I don't know, 8 takes or so or whatever, and then pan them left and right.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. Okay, same on that. Choir thing, same. The trick is that when you're recording people that are actually singing melodies, so not just like shouting or whatever, they have to be like straight up professionals. Otherwise, it's a mess.
Yeah.
You know, like after you get a couple layers, it's like, oh, this sounds bad.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
So the power of having the individual ones is that you can fix them up, tune them up, and also just coach them to getting better takes as well. It's really hard to have like 3 people singing and know which one it is, like to really be able to discern it on the fly and coach them. And people get a little self-conscious when you're coaching them with like their peers are getting no notes and they're getting hammered with like, you're flat. It's tricky, right?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, cool. Thanks for that. That was interesting. So
that's a good question though. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear that record though. It's at least partly self-recorded, and it's always exciting.
Yeah, definitely. It'll be great.
Cool.
The cool thing is that like they decided that before they even talked to me. They're like, we want to record our own vocals so we can take as long as we want on it. I was like, okay, perfect. That's amazing. And they'll send me the track. So if I need another layer, I can just let them know like, hey, this isn't good enough, or just give me another pass of all of this, whatever, right? We've got that flexibility. So I just love that pre-production foresight on their end. And also, out of interest for bands listening, this band has multi-track demos for every single song that's in consideration for the album. Like fully done, tempo mapped and all. So that's the standard.
Yep, that is the standard for sure. It gets more and more though. I noticed that even when people like ask me for a mixing quote, usually they send a demo or like a rough mix or something, and that's what I always ask for. But now they more and more send me multi-tracks. They sent me a zip folder with already like multi-track pre-pro stuff, which is cool on like because they do it. But it's also like that time consuming for me to have to load up everything into a session before we even start the project. You know,
I almost prefer to hear the demo and then get that right after.
Yeah, but it's a good thing that people actually do it, take that advice and do it. So I don't want to stop them from doing that. So that's cool. All right, let's move to today's episode. We're going to do another basic concepts episode. After we've talked about compression last time, we're talking about gates this time, about noise gates. What that actually is, why would you use it, how it works, all of the good stuff. And let's maybe start by telling people what a noise gate or a gate actually is.
Yeah, so a noise gate is, I guess, in my head it's software, but it's definitely not. Originally, I guess it wasn't. There was hardware devices doing this. But it controls the volume of the channel you place it on. And I think it's easiest to describe in the extreme, where it's taking it from full volume to muted to 0 volume. That's like the most common use of a gate, and just the easiest way to think of a gate is that it is going to take it from full volume to muted. And it's similar to a compressor, right? So we talked about compressors last week. there is like a threshold and attack and release and all of these parameters, but it's just how it responds is the difference. And in this case, if it doesn't detect enough audio, again, so if there's not audio hitting that threshold, it clamps down on its gate and then is going to, in this extreme example again, mute that channel. So think of a snare track, pa, pa, and there's
there we have it
doing
again.
The sounds again. Here we go. And there's a hi-hat. Wait for this. Now we're introducing a hi-hat. Pa, pa, pa. Now those hi-hats might be quite a bit quieter than the snare mic on that snare mic channel, right? So you throw a gate on there, and the gate hears the snare hits because they're hitting that threshold. But if you set it right and those hi-hats don't hit the threshold, what's going to happen is it's instead of going that like hearing that channel as pa, pa, it's going to mute for anything quieter than those snare hits. So now you're back to pa, pa, pa without the bleed in the middle. So we've now cleaned up everything other than what we actually intended to mic on that channel, which is really cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you like that explanation?
I did like that explanation. That was a good one. Yeah, like the compressor attenuates signals above a certain threshold and the attack attenuates signals below a certain threshold. That's basically it, how you described it. And I think the one main difference is also that with a compressor, we have the ratio. So it attenuates the signal in a certain way. And the more you exceed the threshold, the more it's going to attenuate. But with a gate, it attenuates the signal by a fixed amount, which is the range. So it's either like nothing, as you said, it's going to mute the signal, or like you can set a range and tell the gate to reduce everything below the threshold by 10 dB or 20 dB or whatever. Sometimes in the hi-hat example, this can sound a little more natural because every time the gate opens and you have the snare hit, there will also be a short psst from the hi-hats or the cymbals along with that snare hit. And if you have silence in between, it could sound a little weird that the hi-hat always gets significantly louder with every snare hit. So you might leave a little bit of that in and only reduce it by a couple of dB. So you clean it up a little, but it doesn't jump out as much on the snare hits.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's a fixed amount and you can set it in some gates. And it's absolutely a hardware device also because, I think of it as plugins mainly as well, but there's still like, especially with guitars, it's a very common thing to have a noise gate pedal in front of your amp to reduce hum and like noise from the amp, especially with high gain amps.
Right.
It's some amps have it built in. Like I have, or like the guitarist of one of my bands has an Angle Powerball. I think I don't personally like that amp that much, but we have it like in the rehearsal room or at my studio now actually, and it has a noise gate in the back of it that you can set to mute the hum and the hiss and the noise in between. For example, when you do palm mute parts or like the chugs, it's just very cool thing to have. So it's definitely hardware as well in its simple form.
Reduce feedback, that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah.
Stop it from hearing itself for sure. Yeah. So do we want to talk about like a gate as an expander at all?
Really quick. Like
okay.
I think of it as sort of the same way. It just doesn't attenuate it completely, but that's actually not correct because what an expander does is I think of it as the opposite of a compressor. So whenever the signal goes above the threshold, it doesn't attenuate it, it boosts it. So it has a similar effect as a gate that reduces the signal by a couple of dB if it's below the threshold.
Yeah.
So it sounds similar than a gate set like that, but what it actually does is it leaves the signal as it is while it's below the threshold, and then whenever you get above the threshold, it's going to boost it by a couple of dB. So it expands the dynamic range. It doesn't reduce it like a compressor. It creates more dynamic range. So the louder stuff gets even louder. That's what an expander does. And it sounds similar to a gate set to like, I don't know, minus 10 dB range or so, but it works slightly differently. So that's what an expander does.
We're going to intentionally not go really deeper on why you might want to do that for now because we got another episode planned for using that kind of stuff.
Exactly.
Another one we got on our list here that you wrote in, Benny, that I really think is great is controlling headphone bleed on vocals especially, right? You can just set a light gate so that there's going to be a huge difference in volume between what's coming out of my voice right now versus when I'm not talking or not singing a line and there's like maybe a little metronome bleed coming out, and you can just cut that out using a gate. That's a great idea.
Oh yeah, Totally. I use it on vocals all the time, actually. I didn't do it as much in the past, but now I use it more and more to, get rid of the headphone bleed, get rid of like weird noises in the room sometimes, or even like excessive breathing, mouth noises, stuff like that. If you set it in a way, if you are smart about setting all the parameters on the gate, and we get to talk about that, then you can set it in a way that it doesn't get rid of all the breathing, for example, but it just makes it a little softer or quieter. And headphone bleed, absolutely. Like with these episodes, for example, with this podcast, I use a gate on both our voices. Like I get rid of the fan noise from the laptop that's right in front of me. I get rid of maybe headphone bleed while you're talking, could be. I get, although not monitoring that loud, but could be. So I'm using a gate on our voices here, and I also shot myself in the foot sort of with it already, because when you if you've listened to the acoustics episode, the interview with Jesko Lohan that we did a little experiment there where we showed how our rooms sounded when we go further away from the mics, and I forgot to turn off the gate, and what happened was when we got really far away from our mics, especially Malcolm, because your room is really, really quiet and treated. When Malcolm's voice dropped below the threshold of the gate, you couldn't hear him talk anymore, and our experiment was ruined. So I had to re-upload the episode. Now it's fixed. You can listen back to that episode if you haven't yet. It's fixed now. You can hear the experiment now, actually. But when I first exported it, I didn't think about it, and I forgot to turn off the gate on our channels, and it ruined the experiment. So there you can hear, like if you've listened to that episode, to the original one, you could hear a gate in action there.
You heard a gate go wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
But now you're hearing a gate doing what it's meant to do, actually.
Hopefully, yeah, exactly.
Hopefully, because I am, like we said, I'm using a new preamp, so hopefully my gain's not set too low and you remember.
I always, because I'm smart about things like that, I like to believe that. I have like a checklist, and I always check stuff like that, of course, when I export the final files. And also I have a visual reference, because I have one of the first episodes, I have the files in my template, and I can compare the clip gain to whatever that episode was, and I kind of match it every time.
You're a genius.
Yeah.
You're a genius.
Thank you.
Hey, this has brought up a small tangent I want to go on.
Okay, cool.
Self-recording bands, actually specifically. So now that we've got you all recording your own tracks and you're sending it to guys like us to mix, guys or girls, that's awesome. Love ya. Now, we just talked about gating vocals to clean them up. But what we should actually also talk about is manually cleaning them. Because it's kind of the same thing. And the reason I bring up vocals is because I feel like many people don't know that's a thing. But when you record a vocal, you are meant to go in and clean up all the stuff in between singing, essentially. Not necessarily the breaths. I would say probably veer on the side of leaving the breaths if you're unsure. But all of the stuff that is just like audio of them sitting there breathing lightly in the background, waiting to sing, that's all meant to go. And you're meant to just kind of like go through, clean it up, crossfade in and out, whatever, and then send it to us. We can do it for you, but it's that's part of it. And while we're talking about that, some things you might use a gate on, like toms, for example, because toms don't get hit very often, right? So it's very common to just have them come into play when they're actually played. So you could use a gate, or you could go in and manually clean out all that space, right? Same with like a hi-hat mic. When they're on the ride, do we need the hi-hat mic ringing? And think about that, because the hi-hat mic's also panned to the other side. So you're hearing the ride now come from that mic on the wrong side of the kit. That usually gets cleaned up as well. But with drums, I mean, this is my opinion. I'm curious with you, Benny, but I would tell a band never to like manually cut and clean drums before sending. Because sometimes I like the toms wide open, for example.
Yeah, exactly. It depends. Sometimes I like them wide open, but I didn't, like, there wasn't a situation where I thought, well, I wish they wouldn't have cleaned it. So they don't clean it often anyways. But when they do, I usually am grateful for having cleaned up tracks, and all of them so far did a good job at it. And I don't tell them to do it, because it could go wrong. You might accidentally cut off the sustain too early, or you might cut into the transient a little, or you might forget a hit or two. That happened actually. Sometimes I get drums where I hear in the overheads that there's supposed to be a tom, but it's not on the tom track. I had that. So right. I don't recommend doing it if you're not really sure what you're doing.
Yeah, it's hard to know without, like, because we talked about compression. We're really affecting the sustain and time of these drums, right? By how we're compressing them
Yeah.
and stuff. So it's hard to know what you need to do without that like
Yeah.
vision in your mind of the mixer.
Yeah.
So probably veer on the side of clean or leaving those natural, but vocals, go ahead, clean them up.
Yeah, totally. What I definitely would not do, and that also came up in the academy, but during the beta program last year, there is a module in there where I tell people, and I tell that all the time basically, where I tell people that they should be bold and just be brave enough to record through whatever gear they have if they think it sounds cool. I always want to encourage people to do that. But then I got a comment from a student, and he's totally right with that. He said, like, yeah, that's good advice, but maybe be careful with things that are destructive and could go wrong, like using gates on drums while you're recording, for example. And I totally agree. Like, if you think you have a cool compressor and that just sounds great and you like that tone while you're tracking bass or with vocals or whatever, go ahead and do it. But I would not recommend using, for example, hardware gates or whatever if you track drums.
Yeah.
Like, don't do that. Just don't. You can always clean it up later, and the risk is not worth it. You're not gaining anything by doing that. It's like you're probably degrading the signal a bit by running it through some crappy gates, and there's too much that could go wrong. So no benefit, but a lot of risk.
Definitely, I 100% agree. There's certain things that computers have done such a good job at making our lives easier that it's like a total shame to go back. And gates are the prime example. Gates are a pain in the ass to set, actually. And especially when you're not using a computer one, you're just looking at like a little terrible resolution meter on a piece of hardware. Sometimes there's not even a meter. And you know, because you're expecting your drummer to play so consistently then. So they might hit the floor tom loud one time and it works perfectly, but if they hit it too soft the next time, now there's no tom getting recorded. Disaster. Have you heard about how some people used to get around that? I heard some fascinating stuff where they would mic up the drums, and keep in mind, back in the day, people used to mic toms, especially like really far away, which sounds awesome if you can do it. But like, so picture a large diaphragm condenser like a foot or two off the tom. It's going to sound pretty cool, I bet. But like if you had cymbals going and stuff, or just a drum kit being played, it would be a mess, right? You'd hear everything. Like everybody's heard a condenser microphone. It's like you can hear your dog breathing in a different room. And what they would do is either have like a trigger on the drum or another mic just like as close as possible. And that sound would be, they'd hit the drum and that sound would trigger the gate to open. And then they would time that to open slow enough that it opened in time for the mic, like that's delayed a little bit by being a couple feet away from the drum. So it was the gate was being controlled by a close mic so that it would hit the mic way further away. Pretty weird.
I've definitely heard that, and in a way, I still do that today when I mix, but like differently. And we're going to talk about that in another episode about sidechaining. But that's really interesting because what we already can tell you is that compressors and gates, they listen to a signal and then they apply whatever you set with the parameters to the signal. But the signal that they listen to and the signal that they apply the processing to don't have to be the same. So you can make a gate listen to one signal and apply the processing to another signal. So you can make the gate listen to the close mic, as Malcolm said, but apply the gating to the mic further away. And the same thing can be done in the DAW. So you can have a MIDI note or a key spike, like a short impulse. You can make that impulse open the gate, but the gate is actually on another track where the actual tom mic is. And you can do all sorts of cool things with that, and we're going to talk about that in a separate episode because sidechaining is a really cool concept. But that's essentially what it is. Yeah, it's a really smart way to go around it. But what's interesting to me always when I hear stuff like that is, and a problem that I run into myself frequently is, even when you do that, the bleed will be so loud on that tom mic that as soon as it opens, you're going to hear the tom, but if there's a cymbal right before the tom hit, you're gonna hear a lot of that, and it's gonna sound weird, and you get these these weird splashy, sort of short blips of cymbals all over the place. So a great tip here, I think a valuable piece of advice would be to write your drum parts in a way when you have a setup like that, and when you know maybe that the drummer isn't the hardest hitting person, for example. maybe write your drum tracks in a way that you avoid a loud hit on the ride cymbal, for example, right before you hit the floor tom. Maybe do it differently. Maybe use another cymbal that's further away, or like just be smart about those things, or don't do a complicated tom fill with a loud cymbal hit right in between, in the middle of the fill, close to a mic. Maybe avoid stuff like that if at all possible. You can sometimes these things are not necessary, and if you're smart about that, you can get a really great tom sound without the bleed problems. That's just something people don't think about often enough. I often get tracks where there's a really cool tom fill, but I just can't use the natural drums because they decided to crash the ride cymbal like in the middle of the fill, and it's all over the place. So, yeah.
Yep. I know what you mean. It's tricky. Or you could record sand cymbals.
Yeah. Exactly. So,
awesome.
Yeah, but like that's also with the hi-hat bleed on the snare. It's a similar thing when I tell people how important the signal, like the cymbal to shell balance is, and to control the hi-hats and hit the snare hard. They always say, or often they say, but you can just gate it or clean it up. But there's the thing, you can't really, because you can gate out everything that's in between the snare hits. But whenever the gate opens, you're still gonna hear that loud hi-hat. So a gate can do a lot, but it can't like get rid of the hi-hat entirely, just in between the hits.
No. Yeah. And that is another reason just to always be conscious of what the bleed situation is. There's always going to be bleed. So that's one of the things that's hard to figure out when you're getting started. You're like, I can hear the hi-hat. Like, we must have to change something. Well, no, you're always going to hear the hi-hat in the snare mic or any mic. But it's how much, right? And a little goes a long way. We've mentioned that before. So always like as far away as you can get it, I say. But drummers seem to disagree with me.
Yeah.
I'm like, what do you mean you can't reach it? It's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Now let's talk about the parameters and the actual how. So it's not really a lot of new stuff here because we already talked about those things when we talked about compressors. It's just maybe a couple of things we need to add here. So the threshold is of a certain volume level. Let's call it that. It's a certain volume level, and whenever the signal is below that level, below that threshold, the gate will not open in its simplest form, or it will reduce it by 10 dB or whatever you set the range to be. So that's the threshold. The attack tells the gate how fast it should open once the signal goes above the threshold. And I don't know if you ever, you probably have, Malcolm, that there's a thing that I can't really explain why that is. I'd have to look it up, but you would think with a fast transient like a snare drum or a tom or whatever, if you set the attack to the fastest possible, like 0 milliseconds or 1 or 0.1 milliseconds or whatever the fastest is, if you do that, it should open right away and all the transient should get through without cutting into the transient or losing anything. But whenever you do that, with most gates, you create a weird clicky noise or an overly hard, weird attack, like almost like if you forgot to do a crossfade or something like that. I can't actually explain why that happens, but to me, it's like always, even if I lose a bit of the transient, I always set the attack to, I don't know, 1 millisecond or not 0.5 or 0.2 or whatever, but not the very fastest setting.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to be too risky to go further than that. And in the sidechain episode, we can talk about ways to get around that issue actually as well. Now, like a compressor, there's the release, but there's also a hold, which is handy. And hold is just like how long it's going to stay open without doing anything. Because the release is how long it takes to return to its default. But that can be a gradual thing, right? Where hold is just like you set it to 1 second, the gate opens, and from that point, it's going to stay just wide open for that whole second, and then the release will kick in.
I think it's totally right. It just stays open, and then when the hold is over, the period is over, the release sets in, it kicks in, and then it slowly closes.
Yeah. Now, why there's a reason this is really interesting, though, is because you can really change how a drum sounds with this.
Yeah.
You can have it go wide open, and then the release be insanely quick, so it just mutes all of a sudden. Like rather than like you've got control over how the note ends entirely now. Way more so than a compressor, I think.
Do you know, like for you people listening, if you think of 80s drums, like big, almost like from today's point of view, almost like cheesy sounding 80s drums with a lot of reverb, there's this gated reverb effect or these typically gated drums that we know, like that we think of when you think of 80s drums, think Phil Collins or anything like that, where you'd have these big open drums with a lot of reverb, but then all of a sudden it's just over. It's like half a second or so, and then the hit is over. And that's exactly what happens. Like it opens, it stays open, and then it closes very quickly, and you get a very long snare or tom, but it doesn't slowly decay. It just opens and closes and opens and closes, and that's this explosive sounding gated reverb sound of 80s drums. That's like playing with the release and hold and times.
Yeah, it can be very cool. I personally love that stuff.
Yeah, me too. But it can sound sort of cheesy or dated, but it can sound really cool if in the right context still.
Definitely. Yeah. I kind of think it's coming back in style right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and you can also just change, or you can use a gate to not only get rid of bleed, but if you have toms, for example, that ring just a little too long and you want to shorten them, instead of using a transient designer or like some sustain tool, you could just use a gate and set and play with the hold and release until you get enough sustain, like enough ring, but not too much. You can just shorten the drum with a gate. That could be a reason. Like I sometimes use gates even on toms that have already been cleaned up, not to reduce the bleed, but just to alter the sustain behavior of the tom.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're really powerful. Yeah, I mean, they get used all the time. If you've done a live show, you've probably had a gate on your mic.
Yeah.
Right? Live sound guys use them like wizards. Yeah, totally handy.
Exactly. One way to go around the attack problem that I described a couple of minutes ago is, by the way, and that's a control that I didn't add to our notes here, Malcolm, that is the look ahead function that a lot of gates have.
Yes.
You can set a gate to, you can basically make the gate look into the future, if you will, and like know that there's a hit coming. Like the gate knows it a couple of milliseconds before it actually happens. Yeah. And then you can have the release set to 1 millisecond or whatever, but if you set the look ahead to 2 milliseconds, it will still open early enough to let the transient through, the attack through, without cutting into it.
Yes.
So the only problem with that is it's achieved by delaying a bunch of other tracks to make that happen, and it can cause weird delay and phase issues with other tracks in your DAW, and that's a whole like kind of worms that you're going to open if you do that. Some DAWs compensate for it, others don't. Some do it better, others don't. I don't know, but often I couldn't use it because then my toms would be out of phase with the overheads or whatever. But if you have a single signal like a vocal, you can use the look ahead function. You can make the gate look into the future a couple of milliseconds and set the attack so that it sounds good and still not lose anything from your transient or attack of the signal.
Totally. Yeah. The real test is going to be if you just heard the blender going off in my kitchen, because our blender is insanely loud. I could hear it very clearly in here. But if you can hear it in the episode, the gate didn't work. But I'm gonna bet that you don't hear a blender in the episode, and the gate took care of it for you.
I hope so. Either the gate or Thomas.
yeah. One of them was gonna be like, nope.
Yeah. So yeah,
that's
cool. Thomas is a great dude. He's editing the episodes for you here. He's doing every single episode for the past 50 episodes or so. He's editing everything, and he probably takes care of the blender, I assume.
The man behind the audio, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Anything to add to this, Malcolm?
I think that's great, man. Like we've said, we plan to talk about sidechaining, which is deeply related to both this and our compression episode. So it's going to be kind of like the secret sauce that ties it all together, I think. And we've already kind of hinted at it a few times. So I think anything that could be added could also be saved for that episode as well. So this is great.
All right. That's great. Hope that's been helpful. I hope you really like those basic concepts episodes. Maybe drop us like a message, an email, or leave a comment, or write a review for the show. Let us know in any way, shape, or form if you like these episodes, if you should do more of these. I think it's very valuable to understand these concepts. That's why we're talking about them. Even if some of them, like gating, are not really relevant for recording, they are more relevant for mixing. But it's still good to know about that stuff. So that's why we decided to do it. Let us know.
Absolutely.
Comment. Yeah. Write a review. Write us an email. Whatever. Post in the community, and we're gonna keep doing episodes like that until we get back to another topic, like something else.
Absolutely. And in the Facebook community, feel free to post what you would like us to cover as well. Maybe there's a basic concept that we should be covering that we haven't even considered. If you don't know what Reverb is, let us know.
Absolutely. And if you're wondering what community we're talking about, go to theselfrecordingband.com/community, or just search for the Self-Recording Band community on Facebook. It's a free Facebook community, and it's a great place. We have discussions there. We talk about what we talk about in these episodes. We answer questions. You can interact with your peers, with other bands. You can start conversations there. It's a very friendly, cool place to be.
Yeah, people are sharing their tracks there.
Go there, join us. Can't wait to see you in there. The selfrecordingband.com/community.
Officially the best Facebook group for audio.
Yeah. Exactly.
You heard it here.
You heard it here. Definitely. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Awesome.
That's it for today's episode. Thank you for listening.
We'll see you next week.
Yeah. Bye.